In the bustling streets of San Francisco, where towering skyscrapers reflected the golden hues of the setting sun and the flow of people never seemed to slow, a small family quietly stepped into an old corner grocery store. Martha Evans, a single mother, clutched a handful of loose coins, her heart heavy as she glanced down at her 2 children. Ethan, 10 years old, and Sophie, just 5. Ethan's oversized jacket draped over his thin frame, while Sophie pressed herself close to her mother, her big, round eyes scanning the store with timid curiosity. The store was well lit, but inside, the atmosphere felt dim. The shelves were stocked with groceries, yet the high prices made Martha second-guess every potential purchase. She looked down at the change in her palm and exhaled a quiet sigh. "We'll only get what we absolutely need," she murmured to her son. Ethan nodded, but as they walked past a shelf, he hesitated, reaching for a small pack of cookies. Mum, can we get this?" he asked, his voice filled with hope. Martha bit her lip, her grip tightening around the coins. "Not today, sweetheart," she whispered, her voice thick with regret. Without a word of complaint, Ethan nodded and placed the cookies back on the shelf. But that moment did not go unnoticed. Frank Dawson, the store owner, a stocky, middle-aged man with piercing, watchful eyes, stood behind the counter, arms crossed, scrutinizing them with thinly veiled irritation. "Here we go again," he muttered under his breath before striding toward them. Before Martha could even place her meager selection of groceries on the counter, Frank was already there, his voice cutting through the store like a whip crack. "Hey, what do you think you're doing? If you don't have money, don't waste my time hanging around here." Martha froze, her eyes widening in shock, while Sophie clung tightly to her mother's arm. The store fell into an eerie silence. Other shoppers stopped in their tracks, turning to watch. Some whispered among themselves, while others instinctively took a step back, unwilling to get involved. I have money," Martha stammered, holding up her small pile of coins. "I was just trying to—" Frank let out a sharp, mocking laugh, folding his arms across his chest. "Don't bother. That spare change won't even cover a loaf of bread. If you can't afford it, then leave." Ethan stepped forward, his small frame trembling, but his eyes held a quiet determination. "We're not asking for charity, sir," he said, his voice shaking but resolute. "My little sister hasn't eaten since yesterday. We just need a little food." Frank scoffed, lifting his chin in annoyance. "Not my problem, kid. Now get out before I call the cops." Martha gripped her son's hand, ready to turn and leave. But then, nothing off. The voice was calm, but carried a quiet authority that sliced through the tension in the room like a blade. From the far end of the aisle, a man stepped forward. He wore a simple black jacket and dark jeans, his posture relaxed, yet there was something in his piercing gaze that made the entire store hold its breath. It was Elon Musk. A ripple of murmurs spread through the store. Some shoppers recognized him, but no one dared to speak. Elon's eyes locked onto Frank as he walked forwards, his steps deliberate and steady, each one weighted with purpose. Frank narrowed his eyes, crossing his arms over his chest. "And who the hell are you to butt into my business?" he snapped. Elon didn't answer immediately. He stood firm, his expression unreadable, his voice even and composed. "Just another customer, like everyone else," he said. "But I can't stand by and watch while a store owner turns people away simply because they don't have enough money on hand." Frank sneered, shaking his head. "Listen, if you want to play the Good Samaritan, be my guest, but this is my store and I decide who gets to buy and who doesn't." Elon tilted his head slightly, as if weighing his next words. "Then let me ask you something," he said, locking eyes with Frank. "Is a real business owner someone who uses his power to crush those in need?" Frank let out a dry chuckle. "Oh, give me a break. You gonna lecture me on morality now? Get off your high horse." Elon didn't flinch. He reached into his pocket, pulled out a crisp $100 bill and tapped it against the counter. "Is this enough for their food?" he asked, his tone calm but laced with an unspoken challenge. Frank glanced at the bill, his jaw tightening. "Oh, I see what this is. You want to throw your money around and play hero, huh?" A heavy silence settled over the store. Then, from the back, a new voice rang out. "He's right." A middle-aged woman stepped forward, pulling a $20 bill from her purse and placing it on the counter. "No child should go hungry," she said, her voice shaking slightly but firm. A young man in a hoodie, who had previously stayed on the sidelines, pulled out a few crumpled bills and added them to the growing pile. "Yeah, this isn't right." An elderly man stepped closer, placing a reassuring hand on Martha's shoulder. "We stand with you." Martha's eyes welled with tears. She looked around at the strangers, these people who had, moments ago, been nothing more than fellow shoppers. I don't know what to say," she whispered. Elon met her gaze, his voice gentle yet unwavering. "You don't have to say anything. This isn't charity. This is just the way people should treat each other." Behind the counter, Frank's face burned red with frustration, his fists clenched at his sides. "This is ridiculous," he snarled. But this time, no one was listening to him anymore. Frank Dawson slammed his hand onto the counter, his eyes blazing with fury. "You people are ruining my business," he bellowed, his voice ringing through the store. "This is my store, and I won't let it turn into a charity handout." Elon Musk remained unfazed, standing his ground, his sharp gaze locked onto Frank, unshaken by the man's anger. "You're right," Elon said, his voice steady and clear. "This is your store, but the way you treat people here says everything about the kind of person you are." His words sliced through the tense silence like a blade. Some customers exchanged glances, murmuring in agreement. Frank's face reddened with rage, his fists clenching at his sides. "I don't need some billionaire thinking he's better than me, coming in here and lecturing me," he spat, his glare burning into Elon as if willing him to leave. But Elon didn't move. Instead, he took a step closer, his eyes unwavering. "I'm not here to lecture you," he said, his voice low but firm. "I'm here to remind you that being human is about more than just making money. When did you forget that?" A wave of murmurs rippled through the store. An older man in the crowd raised his voice. "He's right. This isn't how you treat people." A woman standing nearby, her voice shaking with emotion, added, "You can't just throw people out because they're struggling. Everyone needs help sometimes." Frank's eyes darted around, feeling the weight of the crowd's disapproval. "Fine," he snapped, throwing his hands in the air. "Take your damn groceries and get out, but don't ever come back." Elon didn't break eye contact, his expression calm but unyielding. Without a word, he reached into his wallet, pulled out another $100 bill and placed it on the counter with quiet finality. "They won't need to come back," he said, his voice low but firm, "because today they'll leave with everything they need." He turned to Martha, his gaze softening. "Take whatever your family needs. Don't worry about the cost. I'll cover it." Martha stood frozen, her eyes wide in disbelief. She glanced at the groceries, then back at Elon. I don't know what to say," she stammered, her voice trembling. "We don't deserve this." Elon gently placed a hand on her shoulder, his voice warm but certain. "Everyone deserves kindness," he said simply, "and no child should go to bed hungry." Martha pressed her lips together, and this time, when the tears came, they weren't from shame, they were from gratitude. As she and her children began gathering their groceries, something unexpected happened. A middle-aged woman stepped forward and placed $20 on the counter. "No child should have to go hungry," she said, her voice shaking but resolute. A young man in a hoodie who had been standing silently moments ago pulled out a few crumpled bills and set them down. "Yeah, this isn't right." An elderly man placed a firm but gentle hand on Martha's shoulder. "We're with you," he said. "Don't feel ashamed, you're not alone." Martha looked around, overwhelmed. Moments ago, she had felt nothing but humiliation. Now, strangers, complete strangers, were standing beside her. I don't know what to say except thank you, she choked out. Elon gave her a small, reassuring smile. You don't need to thank me, he said. Just remember this moment, and one day, when you can, pay it forward. That's how kindness spreads. The atmosphere in the store had completely shifted. What had started as a moment of humiliation and cruelty had transformed into a powerful display of unity and compassion. Martha and her children continued packing up their groceries, while other customers stepped forward, adding more money to the pile. Behind the counter, Frank stood rigid, his face still twisted in frustration, but for once, he said nothing. One by one, customers turned to Elon, their faces filled with admiration. Thank you for standing up for them, an older man said, his voice filled with respect. Someone needed to. Elon nodded humbly. It's not about standing up, he replied. It's about showing that we're all in this together. Ethan, the 10-year-old boy, hesitated before stepping up to Elon, clutching the small pack of cookies he had put back earlier. "And I take this too?" he asked softly, his eyes full of hope. Elon crouched to meet his gaze, his warm smile reaching his eyes. "Of course," he said. "Just make sure to share with your sister, okay?" Ethan beamed, hugging the cookies to his chest. "Thank you, sir," he said excitedly. "You're the nicest person I've ever met." Elon chuckled softly, ruffling the boy's hair. "You're welcome, buddy. Just remember, kindness is something we all have the power to give." Inside the store, a woman approached Martha, handing her a small piece of paper. "This is my number," she said gently. "If you need help finding a job or a place to stay, call me. I know what it's like to struggle." Martha clutched the paper tightly, tears spilling over. "Thank you. I never expected this kind of kindness." Elon remained by the counter, his gaze still fixed on Frank. Frank's fists were clenched at his sides, his jaw tight. But in his eyes, beneath the frustration, there was something else, a flicker of doubt. Elon spoke again, his voice measured. "You have a chance to fix this. Think about the kind of person you want to be." Frank didn't respond, but this time his silence spoke volumes. Elon then turned to the woman. Do you live nearby? How did you and the kids get here?" Martha hesitated, biting her lip. "We usually take the bus," she replied, glancing at her 2 children. "But the stop is pretty far. We have to walk a long way." Elon Musk was silent for a moment, deep in thought. Without a word, he reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. A few taps later, he gave a slight nod, confirming the ride. "You won't have to walk today," he said, offering a warm smile. "It's all taken care of." Martha's eyes widened in disbelief. "You've already done so much for us," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Why you do this?" Elon lowered himself slightly to meet her gaze, his voice deep but full of sincerity. "Because sometimes we all need a little help," he said. "And one day, when you're in a position to help someone else, I hope you'll do the same." The atmosphere in the store had completely changed. The customers were still talking about what had just happened, but their voices no longer carried cold indifference. Instead, admiration and reflection filled their words. A few people approached Frank Dawson, the store owner. Their words weren't harsh, but they were direct. "You know," a middle-aged man spoke up. "You have the power to change this neighborhood, to help the people around you. Maybe it's time you started doing that." Another customer, a woman with kind eyes, nodded. "People always remember how you treat them," she said. "A little kindness goes a long way." Frank remained frozen in place, his gaze locked on the pile of money stacked on the counter, a stark and undeniable symbol of generosity, something he had never truly considered before. He didn't say a word, but his perpetually scowling face seemed to crack, just slightly, an almost imperceptible sign of doubt creeping in. The SUV Elon had ordered pulled up outside. A clean, spacious vehicle, ready to take Martha and her 2 children home safely. Before stepping inside, Martha turned back, looking at Elon for a long moment. "Thank you," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "Today, you didn't just give us food, you gave us hope." Elon nodded, his expression gentle but firm. "Take care of yourself and your kids," he said warmly. "And remember, you're not alone." The car pulled away, taking Martha and her children further and further from the store. Elon stood still on the sidewalk, watching until the vehicle disappeared into the busy streets of San Francisco. A light breeze passed through, carrying a sense of quiet peace. For a brief moment, Elon allowed himself a small smile. He knew this day had mattered. An older man approached the counter, looking Frank straight in the eye. "Do you know who that was?" he asked, his voice steady yet filled with curiosity. Frank, still visibly shaken, shook his head. "No," he muttered. "But he sure thinks he's something special." The older man chuckled softly, though not in mockery. "He really is special," he said, admiration glinting in his eyes. That was Elon Musk. Frank's body stiffened, his eyes widening in shock. "Elon Musk?" he stammered, his voice a mixture of disbelief and confusion. The old man nodded, his smile growing. "The one and only. And he didn't do it for attention or recognition," he continued, his gaze unwavering. "He did it because it was the right thing to do." News of the encounter spread quickly through the store. Customers whispered among themselves, some pulling out their phones to look up the name of the man who had just left. But Frank did none of that. He remained still, staring down at the pile of money on his counter. Elon Musk's simple act of kindness hadn't just helped a struggling family. It had left a profound impact on everyone who had witnessed it. And the effects of his actions wouldn't stop there. It was like a spark, a small flicker of light that could shift the way people saw the world around them. As the store continued to buzz with murmurs about Elon Musk, Frank remained rooted behind the counter. His expression changed, shifting from shock to something deeper, something almost like regret. He looked down at the money left behind by the customers, their generosity a striking contrast to the indifference he had shown just moments earlier. For the first time, Frank began to question himself. The older man, the one who had recognized Elon, stepped up to the counter once more. His voice was gentle, but there was an undeniable strength behind it. "You have a chance to change, son," he said. "Not just for your business, but for yourself. People remember kindness, but they also remember cruelty. It's never too late to decide how you want to be remembered." Frank took a deep breath, as if for the first time in a long while, he was truly considering the consequences of his actions. "I never thought about it that way before," he admitted, his voice quieter than before. "I've always only cared about profit." The old man smiled knowingly, his eyes full of understanding. "It's never too late to start caring about people," he said. "Today you saw what kindness can do." Meanwhile, Elon Musk continued walking down the city street, blending back into the fast-moving crowd. He didn't need applause. He didn't need recognition. What mattered to him was knowing he had made a difference. Even if only for a moment, even if only for one family. A notification buzzed on his phone, a reminder about the charity event he was supposed to attend that evening. Elon paused for a second, glancing back toward the store, where the customers were still deep in conversation, still processing what had just unfolded. A faint smile tugged at the corner of his lips. In that moment, he realized, sometimes the smallest acts of kindness create the biggest change. If this story has touched your heart, we'd love for you to share its message by liking and sharing it with your friends, helping us reach our first milestone of 1,000 subscribers, which means the world to us and allows us to create more meaningful stories for you. Don't forget to share your thoughts about the story and let us know which city you're watching from. Thank you for your support, and we'll see you in our next story.